Talking about the transformation. The transformation, being caught up, the resurrection, they're all the same thing. You're transformed by the renewing of your mind. That means you're being changed. Transfigured and transformed are the same Greek word, as it says in when Jesus ascended up on the mountain, he was transfigured. It's the same Greek word. I showed this in a previous videos. But when we're caught up to God, we're being transformed. That's how you're being caught up to God. You're being transformed, and you're transformed by the renewing of your mind. They're not two separate events. They're one continuous event. And you're caught up more so to God as you die to yourself, as you go down into the deaths of self, through the baptisms that God's going to take you through. He's going to chastise us. We're going to go through the afflictions of Christ. Here's a scripture. For as the sufferings of Christ abound in us, so our consolation also aboundeth by Christ. So as the sufferings of Christ abound in you, so does the comfort of Christ. It's not you get the comfort first, it's as you go through it. For as the sufferings of Christ abound in us, so also our consolation aboundeth by Christ. Okay. When Jesus was transfigured on the mount, he wasn't showing a separate event that's going to happen before the final ascension. He was showing that the resurrection now is. He could have transformed and been stayed that way, because you remember when he was in the garden, he said, Lord, all things are possible to you. In other words, he didn't have to die, but he did have to die because that's what God wanted him. He wanted to taste death for every man, as it says in the scriptures. But in other words, he could have been changed, transformed right there and been complete. But he had to taste death for every man. And he had to have the preeminence and the dominion over every principality and power. So he tasted death for every man. And he overcame death. When he showed on the Mount of Transfiguration, it was already that inward man process being revealed to the apostles, letting them know. And it's the same thing that'll happen with us. It's not two separate events, it's one continuous event, because Jesus was already dead to self, and he had gone through the deaths that God required of him. And we will have to enter into the resurrection, to be transformed. Our minds have to be renewed. For us to we're changed from faith to faith. We grow from faith to faith. And it says he'll change our vile body, that it may be fashioned like unto his glorious body. And he showed that in the Mount of Transfiguration. His body changed, his visage changed, his garments changed. It just, the inward man was shown. And another thing is, like, people are trying to note down or get down to the point when they think the rapture theory is wrong. They're trying to figure it out, like, okay, this has got to happen first, this has got to happen first. People assume, they guess, they feed off one another, and then they try to make assumptions on a doctrine. And that ain't how God teaches you. God teaches you through his word and getting close to him and learning from him. I want to tell you something, though. We don't all die to ourselves at the same speed. There are some that are going to be caught up to God faster. But it's not a separate event. It's the order of those that are ascending to God. It's not, okay, those that are raptured and those that are left behind. That's not how it works. We as a body enter in at different moments. So it's not all going to be one group leaves, another group leaves, and then, it doesn't work like that. When the Spirit was poured out on the apostles, there were some, that wasn't the end result. They still had to die to themselves. They still had to grow. They still had to have their minds renewed. And depending on the individual is the gift that arose within them. The death, how dead to self that they were ready to go through was how fast they were going to grow. And that's why Paul talked about ascending to the third heaven. But did he actually leave the earth? He was still working on the earth afterwards. And it says he was caught up to God. The same Greek words that are in Thessalonians when it says we shall be caught up to meet the Lord in the air. But it says, till we all come in the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, unto a perfect man, unto the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. So it's until that very last one enters in. So they don't all enter in at the same time. And it's not different events that happen through revelations like what people think. Like I said, we all are going to be transformed, but we're not all transformed at the same time. We don't all die to ourselves, and we're not all going to be caught up at the same time. Though the Spirit was poured out, some were able to take a hold of it faster and better. Some were able to produce more fruit. Like Jesus said, some will produce 30, some 60, some 100-fold. So it's not we're transformed and then we'll be resurrected. That's false. In fact, a lot of you shouldn't be teaching the Bible. You shouldn't even be handling the Word, because you don't want to put in the time and the effort to study it and kick man's doctrine out. God has to be the one teaching you. The Word teaches itself. You don't have to guess and assume these things and try to get your feeding off others and their dreams and how they interpret them, because you're going to be incorrect every single time. God's got to be teaching you what the dreams mean. The Word will teach you what the dreams mean, not vice versa. There's other things I could say on. I'm going to cut it short here. God bless.